From California is recognized.
Thank you. I thank our witnesses for being here, and I want to examine some of the actual requests that the FBI sent to financial institutions in the wake of the violence that occurred on January 6, 2021. Not the overly broad groups that my Republican colleagues are purposely trying to scare Americans into believing that are being surveilled every single day without any crime prevention or crime-solving purpose in mind. On January 14, 2021, the FBI asked financial institutions for information about Robert Corey Lemke, who made, quote, interstate threats of violence targeting the family of a U.S. congressman, as well as other in furtherance of anti-government, anti-authority extremism. And I would ask unanimous consent to enter into the record the email dated January 14, 2021 from FBI employee to financial institutions into the record. Lemke ultimately pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 3 years in prison for making threatening interstate communications against members of Congress and journalists in connection with the 2020 election. He sent threatening electronic and audio messages to approximately 50 victims he targeted because of their statements about Donald Trump losing the 2020 presidential election. He sent messages to a New York City congressman's brother threatening him and the brother's children. He sent messages to the family of a journalist, and I would ask unanimous consent to insert into the record the press release entitled California Man Sentenced to 3 years in Prison for Making Threats Against Political Officials and Journalists Relating to the Outcome of the 2020 Presidential Election.
Without objection.
Officer Fanone, in your experience, is it appropriate for law enforcement to use all lawfully available tools in the investigation of somebody who's threatening the family of members of public officials or journalists?
Yes, ma'am. It's not only appropriate, it's law enforcement's responsibility to do so.
Would it be a dereliction of duty if you didn't use every lawfully available tool to you to try to prevent a crime from happening or to solve a crime that has already happened?
Yes, ma'am, I believe so.
Thank you. The day before the inauguration, the FBI requested information about Samuel Fisher, who was photographed on the steps of the U.S. Capitol and is suspected of unlawfully entering federal property on January 6, 2021. The FBI noted that Fisher may also have been, quote, manufacturing, trafficking guns in preparation for civil war. Additionally, Fisher espouses racially motivated and anti-government extremist ideology, end quote. The FBI noted that it was, quote, currently preparing enforcement action and is interested in financial information that corroborates Fisher's involvement in firearms tracking. And I would ask unanimous consent to enter into the record the email from FBI employee to financial institutions about this matter into the record.
Without objection.
Officer Fanone, why might law enforcement agencies seek financial information in cases of arms trafficking?
Well, I mean, outside of the obvious that potential receipts or purchases made would provide evidence that, in fact, the weapons were purchased by a specific individual. My understanding is, within these particular requests, it was the FBI seeking voluntary compliance from a number of banking institutions in which their ask was very specific in that they were looking for individuals who were present on January 6th, which I think we can all agree was an incredibly violent assault against law enforcement officers. Those individuals that also had purchased firearms within the past 6 months and or at least there was evidence to support they were planning on returning to the nation's capital on January 20th.
So they weren't just looking for people based on their beliefs. There were 3 different criteria that they were using that all had to be present in order to do this search. Is that correct?
That's my understanding, yes.
Great. Samuel Fisher, by the way, was arrested the very next day. And when he was arrested, FBI agents found over 1,000 rounds of ammunition and several weapons, including an illegally modified AR-15 rifle and machetes in his Upper East Side apartment and his car. Fisher, by the way, wrote after the Capitol riot, quote, seeing cops literally run was the coolest thing I've ever seen in my life, end quote. And I would ask unanimous consent to insert into the record that New York Times article entitled Dating Coach Charged in Capitol Riot Gets Prison Term for Gun Crime into the record. This is a clear example of people committing criminal acts that my colleagues across the aisle are claiming are the victims, the innocent victims of surveillance. But in reality, the FBI was doing their job. They were working to prevent threats to the inauguration and to hold January 6th rioters responsible for their criminal actions. Officer Fanone, I want to thank you for being here today, and I appreciate your willingness to bear witness to what really happened on January 6, 2021, and to dispel these overly broad, fear-mongering tactics that innocent Americans are being surveilled simply because of their beliefs or their religion. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida for 5 minutes.
Yield to Mr. Jordan.